All right. Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Chi and I'm just going to share screen to get us to open the space, and then I will stop sharing screen. There will be no presentations for the remainder of this interactive session. So we are here today on a common theme of relationship building skills, how to gather people and form partnerships. And I will be so delighted to introduce Carla and Lauren later, who are our designated experts, but honestly, everyone who's attending is an expert in their own way as well. So hopefully we'll all share our learning and experiences with each other. So I'll open by saying that I'm calling in specifically, even though we're virtually here. I'm physically in Toronto, or TK Toronto in Mohawk, the place in the water where the trees are standing. What a lovely name for a place. So this is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, which includes the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and many other nations, recorded and unrecorded, who have been stewards of this particular land that I'm lucky to be on now. I find that the fact that my community, thinking about the community innovation and leadership work that I'm involved in, are now able to so visibly struggle and work through challenges is a privilege in its own way, because at the same time, we know that there's a disproportionate amount of Indigenous neighbors who are, homeless against their will, and also whilst actively languages and culture that are Indigenous to these lands are actively eroded. And that's an injustice that I understand that I'm complicit in, and that I can't just social innovate my way out of necessarily. And I assume that everyone is here with that understanding as well, or is open to learning how to dedicate our social entrepreneurial skill set to deliver towards this understanding of the world we're in. So I hope you'll join me and my friends Carla and Laura here to walk with that understanding in your everyday work as well. So I'll introduce them more fully in a short while, but I want to introduce some other guidelines for our time together. So these are, in absence of a longer visioning process for each other, these are just some guides that will help, because we will all be speaking later on potentially and asking questions to each other. So one is protecting our shared time. That can look like, just for the fact that we are only here together for an hour. If you know that you're a big time talker, you can take a moment to step back. You can also protect our shared time by actually making sure that your contributions are here. So if you are typically someone who's really shy, you can make sure that our shared time is used well and that you are also providing your insights as well. I also want to distinguish between the learning zone, the comfort zone, and the panic zones, which are zones that I created in reference to the idea of like safe zones and like comfort spaces. But I don't think we're meant to be here in a totally comfortable space, which is what I understand as affirming what we already know and accept. My understanding is that we're all coming here because there are skills that we know we don't have or want to expand on, and we're curious about what makes us really uncomfortable. But if there are any elements of today's discussion that cause you to go into a panic zone, I don't want that. So you are the best judge of that. Never feel like you need to force yourself to give a story or contribute an experience that overextends yourself, and maybe is a story you're not willing to tell or ready to tell that is probably very relevant to this theme, but maybe just needs a little more digestion. So to end, we only have an hour, so accepting non-closure is very helpful, because we're honestly not going to get all of the answers on this topic of relationship building. It's a conversation we could have for the rest of our lives as a little book club moving on, and it would be great to see where everyone goes. But just to say, don't expect too much out of this little hour that we have together. All right, so that's all I have to say to open the space. Carla, if I can say a little about you, is just for everyone's context, Carla is actually the lead of innovation at the United Church of Canada. Feel free to ask her more about that, and actually has an extensive background and experience in the for-profit sector. Like, we're thinking Coca-Cola, we're thinking McCain Foods, we're thinking like the Canadian Pacific Rail Company, and then transitioned into the work with the United Church of Canada and the social innovation sector. So Carla is coming at this topic with experience from seeing 600 some social innovations come out of the Social Innovation Challenge specifically, and 700 new initiatives that have been funded through what we call the Embracing the Spirit program. So that's the reference book for Carla today. And for Lauren, Dr. Lauren Woolman, actually, formally, although I think we're all allowed to call you Lauren today, right? is referencing like a big background broadly in social innovation, community development, and inclusive practices generally. Right now, Lauren is the social innovation research manager at Centennial College, which is how we got linked together today, and works with so many different community partners, specifically thinking about solutions to social and environmental problems as two big themes, and has a PhD and master's in kinesiology, actually. So there's a big connection through sport, currently working with Rugby Canada, and has like 25 years of experience working in sports programs, which are more related to social innovation than you might think. Anyway, so let's get into it. I'm gonna ask you each to dive right in and tell me what was your interpretation of this theme, this idea of relationship building, and how it relates to community projects. Who wants to go first? Lauren, you go first.
Oh, well, this is fundamental to the Community Innovation Challenge. And the first thing is just recognizing that you can't go at things alone and that we're better in numbers. But obviously, when we bring more people to the table, especially when we're unfamiliar with them, like in this scenario for the Community Innovation Challenge, you're going to meet some amazing new friends and new contacts and build new relationships. But it takes a really long time to establish some really strong relationships and really understand how everyone works. So the point of, I think, this presentation or this discussion that we're having today is how do we work through effective approaches to working with peers when we all have a common interest, which has brought us together to take part in some sort of innovation that's going to have an impact on society.
No, this is great. I also feel like partnerships and the collaborations are the way that we actually do real systemic change work. So a lot of times when we think about social innovation and social enterprise, it's often very individualistic. So what I get really excited about this is that actually this is the change that we want to see in the world, is doing partnerships. So it's that foundational piece. I think the tricky part is it's actually easier just to go it alone at the beginning. It actually takes longer to do this. And so how do you start learning to crawl and then walk and then run with partners? Because in the end, it's always going to be better to be in with each other.
Let's go right into this idea that of just like general principles for good relationships. Like, what are the general good components to relationships in general, but then specific to a community like working context? What is different, if at all, between the two?
So what are components of a good relationship?
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, so many things. The most important fundamental thing is trust. You have to build trust within the group. You have to gain trust from others, and also trust others and trust yourself. Like, trust all around is really, really, really important. And you got to get to know each other, and that's how you build relationships, create the trust, and showing our vulnerability, showing our skills, showing our interests and our passions, showing our weaknesses too. Once you've built trust, which I think is the most important one, then you can build upon that and build a more wholesome action of how you're going to go about doing it. And just being patient with trust, because it does take a long time. It's not something that comes inherently. There's superficial trust at the beginning where you're like, yes, we're going to do this and this is going to be great. And you think like that you're all kindred spirits, right? But really you have to spend some time with each other, some quality time to get to know each other, to know your personalities, to know your skill sets, whether they're soft or hard skills. And that will build that trust. So that's my biggest one. There's obviously other little things, but I think trust is my theme.
Yeah, good. I think, trust in each other is one piece of it. And then the other part, which is still related to trust, is like the mutuality. So the fact that what Lauren, you're saying, like knowing yourself and knowing your partners and like what's the assets and what the gifts everyone brings. Well, that's like the competence, right? So you have to trust each other that you can actually do things and you're actually adding value for each other and you can do better. You have to see that. And then I think the other piece that really makes or breaks a partnership, and I've seen this a lot in for-profit as well, is that if you don't have aligned goals, if you're not going in the same direction, you don't have a clear understanding of like, this is the vision that we have together. As soon as that breaks, the relationship breaks. So those three are kind of like the trifecta, I think, of a solid partnership.
That resonates a lot with my personal experience. And I would only add that in evaluating and assessing that trust, like you have to be assessing it and reassessing it. Actually, like I've known some social entrepreneurs to like be more rigorous about assessing it. Like they'll actually list all of the human beings, not the organizations, but the human beings that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And then just like sort of like gauge where they're at with each other. Like what are the first gut emotional responses you have when you see those names? Is it like, does it spark anxiety? Does it spark like just like a general warmth and like relief? That's very different. And it's actually like, it doesn't mean like cast out the people that you feel like you aren't at that same level of trust. They're like people, you know, you partner with different people for different reasons. But I would say don't discount the amount of like emotional labor, to be honest, in maintaining all of these as ongoing conversations. And like then, and like by assessing that and like understanding like what is your standard for what you constitute to be a good enough relationship for your project, and then what is like the ideal like actual good standard. So I feel like you guys just articulated really good standards that people should be actually actively looking for in the people you're dealing with.
I also think that like what I'm learning too is that people will give different degrees of things, right? So for instance, some people will be loud, like will be more vocal in their enthusiasm or their contributions. And some people might give volume of good communication and might give volume of work. And some people are going to give quality work. So they're going to give maybe less communication and less volume of work, but they'll give you really great specific skill sets that you need, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just recognizing that not everyone's equal in how they approach the project and how they contribute to those aspects of the project, but just recognizing personalities and different skill sets and recognizing that they're not all like 100% the same will really help you, first of all, not have these high expectations that are just unreasonable to obtain, but also that you can get the best out of everyone. And there's going to be natural leaders, and there's going to be natural people who are quieter and so on. But just finding out how it's like a waltz. How do you waltz together? How do you dance together will be the most important thing.
Carla, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combo of what you've both said. For me, is following the energy, right? Like you're not going to have partnerships with everyone, and that's okay too, right? So I think that's one thing that I always go with my gut, kind of what you're talking about of looking for everyone. But yeah, that's really important. It's like, you know what, sometimes you can't have a strategic partnership or a deep relationship with every single organization. And so knowing when to walk away is just as important.
You're reminding me, like, I remember being much younger or initially starting out, and it wasn't necessarily clout chasing initially, but it did. Like clout is some part of it. Like the reason why you tend to say yes more than maybe you should initially also is like you're just starting up your project. And so it seems like the more people you have on board and the more organizations that you can sort of tag in or add a logo onto, that somehow seems like linked to the value of your contribution and like the legitimacy of your work. So I think sometimes that counteracts our good judgment around like actually assessing like where we are at with our relationships and which ones are strategic, which ones make sense for us to keep on putting more energy into. I totally agree. Okay, do you guys have any more tips that you'd like to highlight in managing that difference of opinions in relationships? Lauren, I see big nods there.
I'm dealing with a situation right now, which is around communication. I think that one of the downfalls that we struggle with in working relationships is lack of communication, whether someone is too intimidated to say that they're not capable of doing something or they're not available at that time. A lot of people have poor communication, and then it leads to disappointment within the group. So for instance, over communicating is better than under communicating, and being honest with your communication. So if you commit to something and you can't do something, maybe you don't know how to do it, or you just literally say a series of events happen in your personal life or whatever, it's best to communicate that right away. I think that's one of the downfalls, I think, within teams is people shut down sometimes and don't talk about what's going on with them. Both, with regards to relationships they have with other people, they're having challenges, or actual completing tasks. And I think or the commitments that they've created. So what I always say is whenever I'm working within a team is to always express yourself and to always let us know what's happening. And I think that that's something that people are it's tied to a lot of anxiety, I think, around not letting other people down by communicating something that potentially would really impact the group in a positive way. And also, if you have trust within your group, if you can't achieve something that you set out to, then people are going to be much more empathetic to that and be much more supportive to help you through that process or to take that on for you if you're not able to do it. So you're not, it's not a failure, you know?
Right. And I guess I'm gonna, again, throw some things from my supply chain background of when we had strategic partnerships. Like once you have them in place, it's like the communication is like, how are you ongoing? Because this is how, once you have a partnership in place, how do you stay close? Right? Assuming that you've decided to stay close. It's like, how do you do joint planning? And this is not like you just already having your agenda in place and throwing it at your partners. That's not how it works. It's like, how do you actually do joint planning of, you know, we've have an agreed vision, our common goal that we've already decided on, and how do we now do planning to get there? Keeping it strong also is like the ongoing communications Lauren was talking about. If there's any risk or reward, like how are you sharing it? It shouldn't just be on one partner or the other, because then guess what? You don't have the mutuality that we talked about. And then joint operations, I mean, it sounds a little bit too businessy on this one, but like, are you transparent on your data, or like, how are you sharing things? Like if you have, like for this, the Eventbrite, how many people have access to it? Does everyone know what's going on? And I think for the Community Innovation Challenge, we have like 7 large organizations trying to learn to work together. So it's kind of funny, all these things I'm describing are what we're figuring out too. We're trying to live that out.
I'm really curious because it's often most helpful when I was starting out to hear like actual examples of like how you guys went about pursuing those partnerships when I've never done it before, like, or maybe like it's a tiny community garden project that I'm working on. And it's the first kind of social innovation thing I've done. Like, how do people actually contact these like these big partnerships and have these incredible in-between organization multi-year relationships? Like, how did that start for you guys? What is that actually? Do you literally send an email? Like, how did you get that going?
I do that every day. I look for organizations. I write to them a sincere letter. I find out who is the person I really want to speak to. I'm doing it all the time, but maybe, I mean, obviously I'm in a position that I'm able to with being with Centennial College, but actually I've done it all my life. I've been doing it since I was a kid. I actually remember, and this is going to say super cheesy, but when I was in high school, I was contacting people for sponsorship to sponsor a high school sports team. Like I'm that person. So you got to find within your group, you have to have the confidence to be able to have the confidence to go out and say, I'm going to do this, right? Because it will come out in your communication to that group. You're definitely going to want to reach out. You really want to be strategic about who you're contacting and why you're contacting them. You want to talk, you want it to be very not superficial and not corporate-y, right? It's always good to, and actually do your homework, right? So don't go to them. I've seen it before where you're like, I'm so impressed with your work. And then they catch you by saying like, what is it? What are you so interested in? And you're like, right? Be sincere, do your homework, be strategic on who you're going to contact, and take the risk. And don't stop there, right? The other thing too is we're all 6 degrees of separation. We all have something in common with each other, right? And I think that we shouldn't be so scared when we have the same passion for the same topic potentially, right? People want to partner with people. People want to speak to like-minded people. So don't be afraid to go out there and find the common ground between the two of you.
Is that what happened when you guys first met, Carla? Or like when you get requests, what does it look like when you actually are on the receiving ends of requests for partnership and you've never met the person before? Like, what have you seen that's like really great, and what have you seen that's like honestly just embarrassing?
Yeah, I think I like to go into any conversation without expectations. And I think going in with curiosity and questions. So I was actually, like Lauren said, we were introduced from someone that we both know, just thought you guys would have a great conversation. I think we both came in with 0 expectations. And I also came in with a lens of saying yes. And obviously Lauren did too, because it's Centennial College in the United Church of Canada. It's not like an automatic relationship, right? You would think. I mean, I think it's automatic, but not everyone would. And so going in to be like, okay, yes, there is something here. And so what are the questions that we need to ask? How do we keep on digging? Because there is going to be a commonality, because especially in social innovation, we're all hoping to make the world a better place, right? We have different ways of thinking of how it could be done. But if that's the commonality, it seems like a no-brainer to build partnerships within the sector.
But I would add to that, Carla, is there's two levels to our relationship, and there's actually two levels to every relationship I have at Centennial College with community partners. Personally, we get along really well. Hopefully, Carla. And then secondly, professionally, skill set wise, we bring a set of skills. And then the third is our two organizations that we represent are suited for each other. There's like three. There's like personal, professional, institutional, I guess you could say. And if we didn't get along on a personal level, we wouldn't work together. And it's not just because I'm a nice person, it's the relationship between myself and Carla. Carla, you're a nice person too. But what I'm saying is the relationship too. And actually with Carla, like after spending some time talking to each other, we actually have a lot of personal commonalities. And that's where I'm kind of getting to is, I think when you're doing community engagement or you're doing any sort of partnership relationship, you have to get into that personal level to some extent. You don't need to know everyone's kids and pets and all those kind of things, but you do need to have a personal connection, because people buy off people they like. And I know that sounds really corporate-y and capital, but essentially that's what it is, right? We like to hang around people that we really like. And that's where we start our relationship.
Yeah, and that's being authentic, right? Like I think I used to always think, especially when I was in more corporate, I was always thinking like I was supposed to be a certain way. And I think that most of you who know me, you're like, well, Carla, like she's gonna say things that maybe I didn't expect her to say. And I often try not to use big words. Why would I use them? They're not really that helpful. And I think just putting my heart on my sleeve when I talk, it does make it easier. Like, why not? I think that I would feel less fulfilled if I was actually putting up those walls. And I think that definitely my work within the social sector has allowed me to lean in a way that I never really thought I was allowed to, which I think is super critical in this work.
But I have to say that it's almost like speed dating or going on your first date. If you go into a meeting or a relationship, like an appointment, like you've set up that appointment to speak to each other, I can tell right away if this isn't a good match, and I will leave quickly, you know? And I think that, not quickly, but what I'm saying is like, I can tell when I walk into a room or even a Zoom space where it's like, it's not gelling, or that the other person is just there for a very specific objective, right? So like, that's where we talk about relationship building, is that, you know, Carla's laughing. I think she's, so if I'm off in 5 minutes, and you know why. No, just kidding. What I'm saying is I walk away from a lot of conversations where I'm trying to build a relationship, and I think, wow, that was really superficial, or that was really like cold, right? I can feel it. And I think that you'll know when you have that perfect relationship, like you have those kind of relationships that need to be built upon, you'll feel it right away.
I am, however, I want to pick up on something that Amaury mentioned in the chat, which is the idea of the extrovert introvert continuum, because I feel like, well, I'm someone who's like ping ponged between being what's described as an extrovert and an introvert. And it sometimes feels like this entire category of skills that makes or breaks your projects, whether in professional life or in community service work. Like, it seems like something that's like exclusively easy for extroverts, and introverts are often undervalued. So I'm curious if you guys could think of any examples where you've worked with people who have, like, let's say, a more typically described introvert approach that has actually been quite successful and like quite specific to their skill set in the way they approach relationship building.
I actually work with a lot of social enterprises who are worried about their ability to build customer relationships and do business development, which is also business development being partnerships. And one thing that they say is the introverted. So it's almost exactly this piece. And so we've really dug into what still makes them great at partnerships. And because basically, whenever you have a strength, the opposite side of the same coin is your weakness. And on this, being introverted, they think, well, I'm not going to just start speaking. Well, what's the opposite of that? Literally the best listeners. they probably can understand someone else's, like what's common, looking for those patterns, ask the right questions to be able to dig deeper. And I think introverts, like when I've seen it in a for-profit, introverts are actually the best business development people because they genuinely understand other people's needs because they're listening better. So I'm quite envious of introverts because half the time what I'm always learning is like, okay, be quiet, like really listen and make space, right? And I think that's something, such a natural gift that introverts have.
Carla, I couldn't agree more with you. I'm a sports coach, right? And so like the quiet ones are not no better, no less than the loud ones. And sometimes the loud ones are loud because they're actually introvert extrovert, like they're nervous and that's why they're so loud, right? Like, and I say that because I'm one of those people. Like I walk into a room and I'm like, oh my God, okay, here we go. Like, I combat my social awkward, like nervousness with being an extrovert, but it doesn't mean that I'm like ego extrovert, right? And I'm not a great listener. That is constantly something I have to work on, and to also lose the space. Like I always take up a little bit too much space, which I'm working on. But when I think of my sports teams and as a coach, seeing the extroverts and seeing the introverts are sometimes they're all great athletes and they all have something to bring to the table. And as a coach is trying to get the best out of that player, right? Then sometimes it's not that, maybe they're not going to be the captain, or maybe they're not going to be this, or they're not going to be that, but they might be the fastest player or the most strategic player, or and so on and so on. I think if I had to give a tip, like an actual literal tip, is if you were a leader and you're someone who's loud, or potentially you would recognize you're within a team and you're kind of the more extrovert or the more organizer of the group, I would do some check-ins with the introverts on a one-to-one basis and see how they're doing, and ask them, one-to-one what they want to do. I think that in a group setting, that might be so overwhelming. But if you can give them something more one-to-one, where you find out what's the comfortable space for them to communicate what they want and what they need. Because essentially we're not all divided into a pie of equal parts, right? Like, wouldn't that be amazing? But it's not the truth.
Mhm.
So if you were considered a natural leader within your group, it's just being really mindful of the different pieces of pies that people are going to give, and find the best way to get the best out of them. And
Let's go into, I agree, and I'm gonna yes and that with an example from my work. But we're almost at the half-hour point, and I think we should just transition this into an open discussion. So Edwin, welcome to the Zoom call. Marianne, we didn't get to say hi to you earlier, but we'll open it up, and I'll start by saying that what everything that you just described, Lauren, about like someone's personality, you can think about it, take that parallel into your organization. So what it looks like to transition from a group meeting to a one-on-one meeting also applies to, like, let's say your weekly check-ins. For me, I had a community garden that had 6 distinct garden partners, each of them a different garden related organization. And yeah, we had like every 2 weeks, we had a big six group wide meeting, but there was consistently 2 groups that would never say anything. And I kind of wasn't checking in on them as the site manager coordinating them all. But then it looks exactly like that. It's like having actually a separate meeting with just like between you as a central coordination point and those groups specifically. And also I noticed that, like, compared to the other groups who contributed a lot with like the amount of marketing and communication staff they had as nonprofits, those 2 groups consistently showed up with actions. Like they would follow through on the to-do list, but maybe they weren't as like vocal and loud. And so like, I feel like organizationally, those are also metaphors that are similar to like what people are like individually as partnerships, that we should be looking out for in like project to project relationships. Anyone else want to jump in with a question to the larger group? Like, I'm really curious if maybe we could do a short go around on like, what's the top thing that's coming to your mind when you're thinking about this topic of relationship building and challenges you're seeing in what you're working on. Maybe I can give that a moment to percolate and then call on some folks.
I can give you an analogy that might help while everyone's thinking.
Yeah.
I was playing sports one day and I had this player, a teammate of mine, who was really mean. Like, she came across as mean, as tough and mean. You go up to her and everyone was really nervous to talk to her, right? And like, she would kind of snappy back, right? And And I thought, you know what? I'm going to tackle this. I'm going to do it. I'm going to get this girl to be my teammate, right? I'm going to work it, right? And so everyone go up to her, start talking to her, and they get shut down, right? And it was hard to work with her. And she was a great athlete, like a super athlete, but her team thing wasn't going so well, right? Anyways, I went up to her one day and I noticed her shoulder was really hurting her. And I said to her, you know, I'm going to give you my shoulder pads, like for rugby. Like, I'm going to give you my shoulder pads. You look like you're in pain. And she goes, what? And I said, I'm going to give you my shoulder pads. Like, I really think that you could use these more than me today. And she went, really? And yeah. And we've been friends for 20 years now. Like, and what I'm saying is that point of like trying to find the entry point of a circle. Like, there's a hole within the circle, and the entry point's not always as visible as you think it is. I know Carla's probably laughing because she played rugby, but it's like the idea that like we're not all designed the same, and trying to find the entry point might be a little bit more complicated. And so you have to take the time to find what's going to make someone else tick. And I think that for me was like a huge analogy of like trying to find what's best suited to get the most out of that teammate. Oh, she's not
Natasha,
watching.
I'm so curious, like what is the big challenges in terms of relationship and partnership building in relation to what you're working on?
Yeah, so I have several, but the biggest one that comes to mind is both from working within the church context and coming from a development context, is often as an organization with a cool idea, we are so excited about our idea and so excited about partnerships, we assign the label of partner to other groups. And that does not, that's not a good idea. And so I came into the current organization, and they had assigned the label of partner to a variety of groups. And then it was my job to go and work on the relationship. But I'd go in and be like, so like, how do you find your partnership with this organization? And people would be like, we're not partners, we're renters. And that assigning of that label had actually damaged a lot of the relationships because the work had not been done to create a mutually beneficial relationship there. It was a very one-sided relationship. But from the organization's perspective, they were just so excited they call everybody partners. And I've seen that in other places I've worked as well. And so that intentionality piece of having a common definition. So I started this job in November 2019, and I'm just finally getting everybody on board to write a common definition of partnership. I've been asking for this for a long time, but we're finally actually in the process of writing that now. And people are finally understanding, oh, it wasn't mutually beneficial. Oh, that was very one-sided for us. Oh, I could see why that was damaging. So that's one of the biggest things that I'm working through is how do we make sure all parties are involved when
That is such a
partnership?
Such a valuable lesson. I'm seeing big nods from Omri. Is that resonating in your experience?
I'm nodding also because Carla wrote, it's about having definitions, and then she later, it's about co-designing the definitions, right? One of the challenges that I face is this push from either governance or people who do the more underground work saying, oh, we should be partnering or engaging with so and so, right? Because it'll magically happen, right? And when Lauren said that we need to do homework is not only, I think homework is not only about understanding and knowing what any person or organization does, but the histories behind that, both personal, professional, and institutional, which I really appreciate, that breakdown, because those are all the levels of relationships that needs to be worked on, right? And then there are ways in which we need to bridge the relationship. If there's anything that I, as an individual, as an agent of the institution, or as a professional, may have crossed in that story, to then be able to deepen it. I also appreciate, I think Lauren and Carla both referred to this, the idea that one can walk into a conversation, right? And sense when somebody has a hidden agenda, right? Just walk in and ask the questions that you're walking to ask, right? Ask the ask. You know, that's the most honest thing that that you can do. But if you're not ready for that, but you're willing to get into the thing that needs to get done, whatever that is, staying in the relationship that might not be a friendship at the beginning, like Lauren's example, where, you know, it was a professional relationship, you know, that she had with her teammate, right? But all of a sudden, the hole for the friendship, you know, or for the deepening at the direction, you know, became apparent, and then you jump through it. Don't expect it from the beginning, right?
Mm.
The problem with that is that it takes time, and a lot of us don't want to put in the time that it will take to build that relationship, so that in the end, like Natasha was saying and Carla suggesting, we can all of a sudden figure out, oh, this is a common language that can describe our relationship, and then we can do this together as
I just want,
equals.
yeah, I wanted to say to both of you that one of the comments that I'm learning huge right now is, because I'm such a pleaser, like I'm enthusiastic, I want to please people, is to be able to say, I will get back to you, or let me think about that. Like with the partner thing, we're like, yeah, like we get into a Zoom call, we get overly enthusiastic. We're like, let's do this, do. It's good to say, you know what, taking notes, let's think about it, let's and like lean back a bit, not like make quick decisions, because then we get ourselves into like over delivering, or feeling like we're emotionally pressured to say yes to things, or to you know, have these superficial conversations, right? And especially partnerships, I've seen it all the time. It happens to me all the time. I go into meetings like, whoa, like I feel I'm on a roller coaster. Like, and what I learned the most, especially with power dynamics within the team, is to be able to say, I'm like, let's think about this. Like, let's, and not the passive aggressive, let's think about this. Like, let's shelve it for next meeting. I hate that. But more like, you know, really good points. And I'm going to see if, like, I need to bring that back to X amount of people, or I need to, you know what I mean? Like, I think those are very powerful comments that we often don't make because we're nervous.
Sally, can I check in on you? What is coming to mind for you when we're talking about this?
I was thinking about that I have been approached a couple of times, and that I can think of, where there was a lot of what they could get from me. And so it's one of the things that has really stuck with me. And I think probably one of the reasons why those partnerships didn't work is, or haven't worked yet. And it's one of the things that I try to think of often, is that not to go in with these, not just expectations, but what I can get out of you and what I need from you. And this is what I think would be great. And this is your side of it. Because I think it puts people off, because it certainly has for me. I think it's a big expectation without the background and all the building up underneath, and the support that the relationship needs from having built, as opposed to just shot up. So that has really stuck with me, and is really one thing that is coming to my mind when we're having this conversation, is to offer what I have and show them what we have to offer and what I've got to give, and to be honest about what they can hope for from me and expect from me. That way I'm not, because I am, as Lauren said, I want to just say, yes, I can do that. Yes, I can do that. Yes, I can do that. And then my husband gets on my case that I'm working 20 hours in a day. Because I just want to say yes all the time. But then I don't always find that maybe because I'm overextending, I'm not giving my best to each group. And so I think that being honest, and yes, healthy boundaries. Yeah. But I think just being honest with what you have to give, and putting yourself on the table.
Edwin, Marianne, and other folks who haven't chimed in, I've checked in with you through the chat, but please feel free to unmute anytime, or use the raise hand function, which if you hover at the bottom of the screen, should be one of the reactions available. Marianne, yeah, what are you thinking about?
Sure. So my one, I guess maybe question might be my experience in working with a group where we have come together to say this is a project we're all vested in, that we'd like to see happen. And then one person in the group just not fails to deliver, but yeah, doesn't really meet my expectations of delivery. And how, how to manage that when, you're a team, you're a group, and so how to manage that effectively. So I struggle with that.
Marianne, I deal with that all the time, and I'm dealing with it today. I have a scenario that's happened to. I've asked someone to do something 4 times for me over a month. They haven't done it ever. And then at the end of it, they're like, tell you what, I can't do it. And you should have just communicated that at the beginning, right? Like, they have to be realistic about their expectations. But what I would say, because you're in now the scenario where some people are letting you down within a team, and it's going to happen over and over and over again, is the first thing is never to be too emotional about it. People get backed into a corner when you approach things with an emotional feeling, because they feel bad. They know what they're doing is not productive, and they're probably embarrassed about it too. So what I would really say is to approach it in a logistical way, like in a logistical way, rather than an actual like, wow, I'm totally disappointed and like, blah, 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 and an emotional response. And there has to be a resolution to it. Like, if you can't do this, so that's what actually happened today. I had someone who I asked a month ago to do something and they didn't, and I checked in 4 times and they couldn't do it, and they couldn't do it, and they couldn't do it, and they couldn't do it. Well, today I said, I actually need it today. Can you just be clear? Like, you can't, like, can you let me know if you can do it or not? And because we're going to have to do alternative options to, like, we're going to have to come up with other arrangements, right? And he's like, you're right, I can't do it. Now I have to figure out how to go back to him and talk about, oh, my kid's here, about, how I can deal with that personality after the situations happen. 1 second, Reese, I'm reading. And so shove my kid away.
I'm like,
1 second. Actually, I'll let you guys go. I'm going to put him away for a second, but I'll just leave it at that. All I can say is that what I should have done is not waited for 4 times for that to happen. We should have given like 2 strikes or something like that, and then quickly act because of it. But you do have to deal with that person afterwards. I have to talk to that person and talk about it without being emotional about my expectations and about their responsibilities to the team.
Yeah, the challenge is in this situation that they are the ones that have collected the money for the project, and so like they need to recap it, and they need to distribute the money to the other team members, and so it's not a choice of we can delegate it to someone else. It's like they are the only ones who can now follow through on this.
That's actually when, like, I think the unhappy side of relationship management is when accountability needs to come into play. Obviously, like, we extend every opportunity to like directly engage the person. In your case, it sounds like it's like really like you've tried to do that, but then it's like, with like going to their higher up or going to somebody like their board of directors that they're accountable to if it's serious enough. But then honestly, the most effective accountability measure in my personal like project failure experiences has been to just say, like, very explicitly, hey, that specifically was not a good experience for us, and we don't have the capacity to deal with, to be disrespected in that way with our time, and we will only, like, I will not be working with you for the next 2 years, and we'll reevaluate whether our project will ever collaborate with your organization afterwards. Like sometimes that's the only consequence that you really can hold over them, especially if you were like a smaller project than the actual main holders.
Unfortunately, they're a key team member, and so without them, the project probably wouldn't happen like next year. Although the team as a whole has said, love the project, we're like super successful, and it's just tying up those loose ends this team person has done it on other projects too. It's not just this project. I think it's just a characteristic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I just have to put a greater sense of urgency to put in some kind of a deadline.
I think like what I was just mentioning before is, it's just identifying, or if you have a gut feeling or identifying something early, right? And contingency planning, I think is really important. But even pre to that, which I don't think would be useful for you, because you can set expectations and people can still not achieve those. You know, you can set up roles and responsibilities and deadlines. I mean, I have work plans for everything and no one reads them. I wish they did. And I wish people read their job roles, but they don't. But, you know, essentially you have to identify early and tackle early. And like the story I just told you, I had that it's like, shouldn't have waited 4 times to actually tackle the issue, because now it's late, you know? So like, how do you tackle something early? And then it's also the fine line of like what I was saying before of like backing someone in a corner, you know, like, I wish I had I've never confronted, I'm really bad at confrontation. So like I would be way softer, right?
But like, it's actually
that's
quite
not
soft.
good.
It was just like, hey, just a heads up. Don't want to do
No,
that
you're
again.
right. I'm saying
Yeah.
I don't have I have a bark with no bite, right? So like, you know, that's one of the challenges I have is confrontation. That's one of my weaknesses because I'm a pleaser, right? But I
Carla's
would say
unmuting.
identify
I'm so
early.
curious what Carla's thinking about.
Well, it's not that exciting. I was just gonna give you, I mean, sometimes just being direct is the most important thing, right? So I think there, but I think for me, I can give lots of examples of like red flags that we have or orange flags. And so when you start having more partnerships that are similar, just looking for them. So for me, I intentionally crawl now, like I won't go too fast with a partnership. I'd like to really see how they act and how we can interact and what makes sense. One great example is we've partnered with about 20 universities and colleges. Now Lauren's going to get jealous. And, only one didn't work. And the one partnership didn't work because before we did anything together, they wanted us to sign like an MOU of how we were going to operate exactly and how it was going to work. So we signed the MOU, we got it back, and then they completely failed. Like, so literally in that partnership, the fact that they wanted it to not be natural, not be genuine, not actually be as relational as a partnership needs to be, was a red flag for me. And so
that
now
sounds like a weird distortion of the situation that Natasha's going through. It was throwing the label on it, and actually there is this like huge definition exercise, but I guess the key there is that it wasn't co-designed. Yeah, exactly. Incredible. In our last 10 minutes together, I would love to turn our topic towards like more succession planning, because you guys have all hinted at it already. But I think this is where the framework that Lauren introduced, where you kind of separate like the person and the interpersonal relationship you have with the organizational representative and like your organization's relationship with that organization. That's where succession planning really gets interesting, I feel like, because I believe in my project and I want my project to succeed beyond my involvement with it. And so like, how much am I hoarding for myself and my personal contact with this partnership in the way we're approaching this partnership, and how much room am I leaving for that to be shared with other members who are collaborating with me in my organization? Do you all have thoughts or deep lessons learned from that aspect?
To further problematize that, I'll just like to throw in and this might be a very US American thing, is the burden of legacy, right? Both institutional and personal, and how a lot of us coming new into executive leadership are operating in this duality, right? On, we want to make this a team effort, you know, at the walking as an institution into partnership with another institution, while having this expectation, right, that there's somewhere looming in the back that legacy is everything, right? So that goes into, you know, do I as the ED manage the relationship, right? Or do I come in early in the partnership or in the relationship building towards a partnership? This is everything you get, including everybody on the team as part of the resourcing that comes with the team. And it's a really difficult thing it has been much more difficult for me to manage than I thought it was going to be.
So one thing I've been totally dorking out on innovation research lately, especially in the charitable sector. And one thing that's kind of neat about this whole like the succession planning of the partnership relationship piece that you're talking about is they say that the most innovative organizations are when the people within the roles, within their jobs are actually exposed to 25% of their work is dealing with people outside of their sector or outside of their existing ecosystem. So actually exposing your staff to like other parts of the sector or other sectors completely and other relationships is actually going to cross-pollinate ideas from what other people are doing with what you're doing, which is going to accelerate your own innovation and obviously your own success from that, because you're going to have economies of scales, new ideas, new revenue sources, all these things. So actually partnership development is strategic beyond just the obvious.
I was going to say something totally different. I was going to say, I'm talking more about logistics of relationship. I think that there's no way that you can bring, like, say you have 3 organizations that are going to partner together, you have to have a leader. And I think that you need to establish who the leadership is. And that leadership has to make the commitment to be the one who's going to be leading project managing relationship between the partners, right? And so sometimes we go into things like hoping it's going to be 25%, 25%, 25%. It's not going to happen. And so the leader really has to be the one that kind of is the good cop, bad cop, control, like not controlling from its ideas and all those things, but is herding the group in the right direction. And I think strong leadership will lead to strong outcomes, right?
That's
But I think
interesting.
sometimes we try to be equal and we're not. And I don't think it's a good thing to be equal. I'll give you an example. I work on a lot of social innovation research projects. And I'm always waiting. When I first started, I was like, great, like, let's come up with an idea. And it's like circular, like the conversation is circular. We need someone to really lead, heading us in that right direction and establishing who can do that with us, you know?
Well, I would push back on that, but not to disagree, to say like the nuance between decentralizing the responsibility doesn't mean that suddenly no one is responsible. And I think that's the weird black hole that especially social innovation work, where people try to be really community oriented, decentralized, horizontal powerarchy, all of that lovely stuff. It suddenly just responsibility for the actual deliverables goes into the void. But like I do feel like I've witnessed some really great cooperatives, some really incredible, like very, very democratic structures in the social innovation space, maybe even with faith groups, where they always pair up as buddies because they find that it increases the accountability that people will follow through if they're assigned the leader, because they know they have like a buddy that's kind of co-signed on that with them, that also feels responsible and will also be blamed if nothing happens on that portfolio, and also makes the information a little more transparent to the entire group, so that no one is ever the only person with like holding information and institutional knowledge in their brain. So it seems like constantly people are trying to find a balance between that. Totally.
Hard. And as a sports person, I'm going back to sport because I'm a sports psychologist, is you're as fast as your slowest player. And the captain is not better than the team. The captain is just someone who has a skill set, who can help, lead that team to success and make good decisions on behalf of the team. But they are not better than the team. They're just good at that skill set to help herd the team in the right direction, right? So there is a level of, it is more depowered in that way. Like, we are a team, right? But the thing is, so your captain is usually someone who everyone trusts. It's someone who has a vision that's maybe a little bit beyond other players, or maybe more mature than other players, more experienced player, or maybe more talent, whatever. But their ego will never win if they don't believe in team. And I know I go back to sport, it's just because I love it so much. But what I'm saying, it's because sport mimics life. And when we look at partnerships, in teams, partnership is team, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to look at it as everyone has different skill sets. So the 3 pieces that I wanted to highlight is, we have our personalities that are really important. We have our soft skills and our hard skills. And it's always important to identify those 3 things when we're doing projects or partnerships, to know who's going to bring what. And then having a leader who's really good at being a leader, within that space, to acknowledge and to give up that power to that person. When I say power, I don't mean like power, like political power. What I mean is like to say to someone, I trust your skill set in this role. is very important to the team. So that's just
You're describing power as like autonomy, as like agency, as like initiative as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some people that are great leaders, and there's some people, like we said at the beginning, who are quieter or who have a certain skill set. Maybe they have a really great hard skill, or they have a really great
And they
soft
lead differently.
skill.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Guys, it is the hour is nearly up. So this is why it was so important for me to introduce the idea of non-closure, because I don't feel any closure. I want to have this book club and leadership camp with you guys for many many weeks to come. There will be no Friday session, but we are incredibly honored that some of you came by on a Friday to hang out with us this afternoon. So we'll see you in the future ones. I'll transition this by saying that we had laughed about this being the first session because relationship building is kind of like, it's like we're talking about all of the remaining sessions in the rest of this event series, whether it's strategic planning, whether it's sustainability, and all the other things that are on the calendar, which you should check out. We do have 6 other events coming up, hosted as roundtable discussions for you to bring either really specific problems that you're working on, and also potentially build the relationships to maybe submit an application to the Community Innovation Challenge yourself, which does have funding associated with it. So I will let Carla say more on that to close us out.
I thought you did a great job. So
thank you.
I guess I threw into chat just a reminder that this is kind of leading up for anyone who does want to do a community innovation challenge in your own neighborhood. And part of that is actually having 4 partners, recognizing what is the definition of that. We are super about that. So that's basically 4 organizations, including your own. It could actually be individuals, to be frank, but it's basically like 4 people who think it's a good idea to work on the same problem together. Our next, so it's pretty loose that way. So, and if you have 4 partners who are actually partners, that's even better. But if this is the way to start crawling together to decide on a problem and then do co-design how to solve it with all the gifts you have, the seed funding is up to, well, it is $2,000 for each of your ideas to help them get off the ground in this collaborative that you've created. So I have put how it works in there. Our next session is next Wednesday, I think, and it's about priority setting. So if you have your partners, it's like, how do you decide what gap or what problem to actually focus on?
Because everything is a wicked problem, but you can't do everything at once. So how do you choose? Which I think is going to be an equally fascinating discussion. Thank you all so much for your time. Does everyone want to do what we call a closing check-in? A word to describe how you're feeling and going out into the weekend? I'll let that sit with us for a couple seconds while we pick one. Encouraged. Amazing. Feel free to say it out loud as well. I will also type mine. I am feeling resonance. I feel very affirmed by you all going through similar challenges in your work, no matter at what scale you're working, national or hyper-local, you know. Positive from Lauren. Sally, Marianne, Tommy, Edwin. Oh, I think Tommy had to check out. We'll also send the information about the CIC to everyone as a follow-up email. Change from Natasha. Need to lean into the problems, not avoid. I do think conflicts are a golden nugget. I have many thoughts on that. We should do a whole other session on conflict. Inspired from Sally. Well, thank you all. It is officially 2 o'clock. To respect everyone's time, I will send you off with well wishes into the Friday. Bye-bye.